On behalf of Randstad, I am delighted to invite you here this morning to greet you here for our first Women Powering Business Forum here in the US.
If you have a passion for something, it's much easier to be successful.
Those businesses that have women on board far outperform on the bottom line.
Men and women bring different qualities to leadership, and that's why a blend is best. I'm pulling support from, and I'm not going to trade on it.
So I think women are often faced with choices that are really impossible choices, and that's not true. I'll have you comment on my next question, because a number of our panelists have talked about research done. And the March issue of the Harvard Business Review cited a study, a very interesting study done by two men. It was a study of 7,000 leaders, and they measured these leaders, men and women, for 16 different attributes. And what was very interesting, in all but one of the attributes, women outperformed the men. So were demonstrated as having higher levels of competency in 15 of these 16 leadership attributes, which is very interesting. And in 4, they were significantly higher. And this is very much supported by many other research studies that come to precisely the same conclusion. But if that is the case, why are there so few women in these high leadership roles? What's wrong?
I think there's lots of possible answers to that. First of all, I think there's elements of decisions that we make for ourselves. There have been more and more younger women who may have decided, I don't want that. The attractiveness of the C-suite has probably lost some of its luster. And do I really want to put myself into an environment that is not necessarily as nurturing? So I think in some cases, people are looking at that and saying, I don't want that in my life, and saying no, even though I've got the capabilities to do it. I really am not willing to put myself in that kind of an environment. At the other end of the table, we can actually change that complexion if we take that risk and go there. I think there's also an element of sponsorship. We talk so much about, the importance of sponsorship and having that person who pulls you along. And really nurturing that kind of a relationship, I think, is very, very important. And then it's all the question of, have we been tested sufficiently? Have we been given the opportunities to take a chance, perhaps make mistakes, and not have them be fatal? So I had read a quote just recently, wouldn't it be nice if we think of things as mistakes and learning versus failure? Because failure really carries with it so many negative connotations. So I think all of those things together are things that are still preventing women from getting to where they need to be.
And Pat, do you think that women experience failure or think about failure differently than men? Why does that plague us more?
I guess it comes back from, the more women participate in sports at young ages, perhaps they get over that a lot earlier. Yeah. And because
Susie's like, oh yeah.
Boys are just wired to compete that way, and you win some days and you learn and you lose some days, and you just get stronger for it. And I think more organized sports for girls at younger ages is going to help us with all of that. My daughter would hit me over the head for that one because she's a dancer, and she tells me the same thing applies. It doesn't have to be just team sports, but I think it may come from some of the nurturing that we feel failure more deeply. I think guys tend to brush it off a little bit easier.
It's very interesting. Pamela, what are your thoughts on this question?
I mean, again, I agree with everything Pat said. I think in America, we tend to think about failure and success very individually, so you've made it or you haven't made it. And I don't think we pay enough attention to structure, the structures of what would support certain people to be successful. So I do think, looking at America in comparison to Europe or elsewhere, is that we haven't been good about creating the structural conditions that allow, let's say those women who want to have children, for example, to succeed and have children and not have to make choices. So I think women are often faced with choices that are really impossible choices, and they get articulate, they get sort of talked about as if women choose family over, let's say, promotion. And that's not true. It's in a horrible world where we're not supported as mothers. We have to, we choose that, but it doesn't mean that if there wasn't a structure that had childcare at work and really supported people being parents, that we would choose to be only mothers. So I think I agree. So there are things that could be changed that people have to take leadership in. And so, for example, I think, having childcare at work for people who have young children, just as a de facto thing that happens would be fantastic. I think a bit of, more maternity leave, paternity leave. Although I was saying to Isabel from the racing team that they've also done these really interesting studies, and we're actually experiencing this at Emory. But for example, in Denmark, where they have wonderful structural, everybody gets to have your paternity leave, maternity leave, and you can stay at home for a year, et cetera, et cetera. What they discovered was that when the women take maternity leave, they do what they were supposed to, why they took maternity leave was to stay at home and look after the baby, and they hung out with their baby and got to enjoy them, and then they went back to work a year later. And what the guys did was they outsourced the childcare and went off hunting or whatever. and what we found in academia is the same thing applies, so that we've actually found this at Emory. We have very nice policies at Emory, thanks to women in leadership who took action on saying we need to support people who want to have children. But we found the same thing. The women stay at home and look after their infant, and the guys outsource the childcare and write a book. And so the men keep on being promoted at quicker rates because they've got the book. And the women say, yes, but the whole reason was to look after the baby. Anyway, so.
That's hilarious. Stacie, what are your thoughts?
Well, I also agree with everything I've heard so far. If I go back to that article that you referenced first, when I saw that, I immediately wanted to question the 16 or 17 characteristics that they had on the list. Are they really the leadership characteristics that are most critical, or are they biased in some ways, and therefore women are scoring higher in this particular sampling? So, and part of the reason why I say that is, I think if you look at sort of any given era, economic issues, political issues that are creating challenges for business will change the shape of the characteristics required of leaders. So I think that the survey could very much be influenced by our times, but in the end, I do think that men and women bring different qualities to leadership, and that's why a blend is best. It's sort of like if you would like to have a whole brain at the table making these kinds of decisions, we should make sure that we bring these diverse perspectives in. And to your point, if women, and yours as well, aren't pursuing these roles because of the structure of jobs and companies, then we have to, that will increasingly become a business issue that companies cannot live with because they won't be able to compete. So, and I think, frankly, the younger generation and the use of technology is already driving massive change in the way we think about work, where it gets done, in what hours, what kinds, how fast you can do things, how collaborative. So even if you're separated globally. So I think that we're living in an interesting time of the redefinition of work that will create more flexibility and possibility for women.
Absolutely.